So let's look just a quick overview of what we'll cover, and it's a it'll be a pretty fast presentation. There's probably more to say about all of these things, but we'll talk first about why PR and content go together so well. We'll talk about how PR can help you amplify your content initiatives. And then we'll go into some tactical ways the PR and content teams can partner together and work more effectively together. And of course, everyone loves tools, so we'll leave a little time for tools toward the end. So first, let's talk a little bit about why PR and content do go together so well. We know that creating content just on its own isn't really enough any longer to get results. We know that outreach is really necessary to get more attention and maybe even to generate links to your content. We also want to think about links from relevant sites, and this is via Moz, of course, because that really helps with your keyword rankings. The top 2 organic keyword ranking factors, according to Google, are high quality content and links pointing to your site. So that's exactly what this combo can deliver for you. We know that strong content plus pitching equals results. We know that content marketing that generates press is 2 times as effective as originally thought, and the long-term ROI is potentially many times higher than that. So they make a great duo, newsworthy content with data points and highly tailored outreach could really help drive high authority link building and brand coverage. I want to take just a minute to talk about digital PR because that comes up a lot when I'm talking about these topics. I want to be very clear that when I talk about digital PR, I'm not only talking about link building because I really view digital PR as traditional PR with the byproduct of links. And why do I think this is an important distinction? Because it's really beyond spammy link building. It's about trustworthy sites. I'm sure that if you want to build spammy links, there's probably somebody out there you can pay to do that. But when we talk about digital PR, sometimes someone will call me and say, hey, can you just get us a link in Forbes or Business Insider or whatever it is? And I always have to say, that's not really what I do. I'm sure if you want that, you can get it. But really, digital PR is more than link building. It goes beyond link building to build expertise, authority, and trust. And trust is really, I think, more important than it's ever been, not only in business, but just in life. Because if you don't have that trust, the relationship begins and ends right there. And we know this because if we look at things like the Edelman Trust Barometer, for example, this year brands were the most trusted of all the entities that they measure. So, of course, political organizations, even media is not as trusted as brands are. So we really have to think about, what can brands do to build on that and to continue to build that relationship with their audiences. One thing we can look at here is how PR can amplify your content because you're creating the content. So how can you get more visibility for your content? We know that there's a lot of content out there, and we are really trying to create content that gets people to stop and read, watch, or listen to our content. And that's just not easy to do. So if you're going to create newsworthy content, here are some questions to ask yourself. Think about, of course, what are your primary topic areas, your areas of expertise? What do we have to talk about that others may find interesting? For example, when I work with manufacturing clients, a lot of times they think everything they have going on is boring, but honestly, they have so much that is really compelling. And there are a lot of stories that are kind of behind the scenes that, you might not really know about if you didn't have somebody telling those stories through content, through public relations. Think about information that you shared that has gotten the most engagement. Look at your customer data. There may be interesting points there you can share. And if you can, even consider doing some research, because journalists love research, especially research that's done well. So if you're going to do that, I would just suggest thinking through it really carefully, even hiring, professionals to help. For example, I had a client one time that wanted to share survey data based on five respondents. And so, I mean, that's, the journalists are going to see right through that immediately. 75% of five people, not super compelling. And then, of course, you're going to want to consider tangential content. And this is something my friend Amanda Milligan, who is Melanda on Twitter, you should follow her if you do not. She talks about this a lot. And I love this because it gives you some additional ways to kind of spoke out from your content. And it gives you more topics to talk about. I'm going to give you an example. So say you're in the home repair business, of course, you're going to want to talk about home repair, but then related to that, there are all kinds of topics related to someone's home that you could possibly do research on, or, if you don't have the ability to do your own research, you could probably find some research that you might be able to tie into in some way. And these are just some examples, of course, cooking, families, how to use your outdoor space. And this is just, again, an example of one business, but I'm sure you could think of these for your own business. And then if you don't have your own data, where can you go to get data to use as you create content? So here are some ideas. And then even beyond that, here are some sites where you can go and maybe grab some data to support some of your points, which is perfectly fine as long as you cite the source. Once you have your pitch, your content, and everything is ready to go, then you have to stop and think about who you are going to pitch. And you have to think about it from the journalist perspective. Newsrooms are shrinking. We know that to be true. We know the average journalist is being asked to do more and more. They cover 3 or more beats. They receive, this says 5 pitches. I think that's probably conservative. I think if we ask some journalists, it's probably a lot more than that. And the point I'm trying to make is if they don't read your pitch, your chances of getting coverage are 0. So you really have to think about this carefully before you go out there and start just zapping it out to any journalist, any publication.
Huh, that's interesting. I mean, I'd like to linger on this slide for a minute here. The average journalist covers 3 or more beats. That's a lot. So for anyone who's not familiar, a beat is at a topic area, right? So maybe a technology journalist might have a couple of beats, and these beats might be like cloud tech, clean tech, and maybe ed tech, like educational tech. It might make, like, those are just random examples,
Mm-hmm.
but it could be that. And maybe that kind of journalist won't cover if a social media startup just got a new round of funding. If they're not going to cover that, they would be covering more what's in their area of coverage. So I think that's also really important to know as you consider crafting your pitch. Think
Mm-hmm.
about who it's going to and why they should care.
Mm-hmm.
And being cognizant of the fact that they receive many pitches per day. And these pitches range from press releases to cold emails to, somewhere
Yeah,
in between.
absolutely. That's absolutely right. In fact, we're going to talk about that. So, what are journalists looking for? And I'm glad you said press releases, Amanda, because a lot of people think they're dead and gone, and I beg to differ. Because I think journalists like press releases. I'm not saying you need one every time you pitch, wouldn't go that far. But certainly, the information that they look for is usually in the press release. So it's the who, what, when, where, why, how, the pertinent information that they need to kind of see at a glance. And then beyond that, you can provide a link to more information, or they can ask questions or whatever. But I do think press releases can be very effective when used in the right way. And then, of course, research. They love research, as we've discussed. Always be thinking about the visuals, whatever you can supply. I think that makes a huge difference. A lot of newspapers no longer send out a photographer to take their own pictures. For example, I know locally they just ask us to send, our own images in. And so always be thinking about that. Trade publications, really, I mean, unless it's a really big national media outlet, perhaps.
Ooh, that's such a great point. I think I was thinking back to my own sort of newsroom days. I used to be a tech journalist. Having multimedia was really, really important. Because part of when I worked in tech news, a lot of my job was sort of behind the scenes, sort of production work. And part of what I did was source art for the articles that we published. And of course, I was abiding by standards of making sure I had the right to use a photo, making sure it was accurate, and those things. So what I ended up, and this was so many years ago, where the main resource that I had was Flickr's Creative Commons archive. So Flickr was, people today we have
Mhm.
Unsplash and Getty
Mhm.
Images. Back then it was
Mhm.
Flickr, and it was just
Mhm.
user generated photos. And the Creative Commons archive is one that it basically meant you were allowed to use any photo as long as you gave attribution. So we did that. But I called this out because there were times where we would cover, a certain company or publication multiple times. And we just ended up using the same photo over and over again because that was all we had. So it's a good opportunity. It doesn't mean, I mean, of course, it should be relevant to your coverage and
Right.
everything, but it is good to keep in mind. Like when you think about the press coverage that you want for your company or for yourself,
Mhm.
think about the imagery that you want to be out there too. Think about like the like what photos or lifestyle shots make your product shine.
Yep.
Things like that.
Yeah. And I love it when clients have spent money on professional photography. It makes a huge difference. And even like every year or every 6 months or whatever makes sense. I mean, some businesses can't afford to do it all the time, but I think it makes a difference. And I do think that journalists, if you have compelling, imagery to go with your story, it can actually maybe sway them a little bit. So, because it's going to draw more, people to the story. So I think, why not? And then, of course, access to experts, if you can offer interviews with, and that doesn't always have to be your CEO, for example. That could be somebody who, knows a lot about the product, an engineer, technology person, product manager, somebody like that. Or it could be, it could be another C-suite, executive or somebody. Just, it doesn't always have to be the CEO. Sometimes the CEO is not the best spokesperson for various reasons. And then, choosing who to target with your pitch. I think Amanda was just kind of touching on this a little bit. And this is where SparkToro can really help you. And I think it's gaining a lot of traction with PR pros because you really want to stop and think about, which readers, viewers, listeners, who are you trying to reach? And I love when Rayan talks about the Wall Street Journal problem, because this is something that I think every PR person I've talked to can relate to. Um, a lot of times you talk with a new client, and they say, I usually ask, what are your goals? And like, what are your, what media outlets would you like your business to be featured in? And of course they're, a lot of times they're going to say the Wall Street Journal, they're going to say TechCrunch, they're going to say something like that. And it's really more about their ego than anything else. It's not necessarily where their audience is. So I think that we need to be thinking about that really carefully and advising clients, if you're in that role, to think kind of beyond that. I think I've also heard Rand say, of course you could spend some of your time, pursuing outlets like the Wall Street Journal, but then try to convince them to allow you to spend some of your time beyond that, as well. And then as you come up with a strategy to reach out to those media outlets, media databases, they have trouble keeping up. And I think Twitter is a great place to find the latest and greatest information for the journalists that you are wanting to reach out to. And you can start connecting, you can start engaging, before you ever need to pitch them anything, which is also very wise to do. I had someone tell me that they didn't think Twitter was good for for media outreach, and it did make me chuckle just a little bit because I think that it's one of the best ways actually, and I think it's a very valuable tool in the process. And then beyond that, you want to think about tailoring what you're sharing with each journalist. And I know that Amanda's talked about this. I believe you had a thread on Twitter, and I think you've talked about it on here before. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. Very much tailoring your pitch um, to the individual that you are sending it to.
Right. Instead of just
Mhm.
blasting it out, the same pitch to 100, journalists. I don't think that ever worked. And I know for a fact that reporters do not like that. I talk to reporters on Twitter all the time, and I just wrote a piece about, some of their pet peeves, and that was one of them. And of course, misspelling their name, or, obviously if you're using like a merge function, it's like dear first name, or, it's like, no,
Yeah.
don't do that.
Yeah, it's almost better to just say, "Hi there," than to mess
Right.
that up.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then as far as tailoring the pitch too, it's really all about being specific to their needs, and to their audience. It's not even just I mean, if you happen to be a fan of their work, yes, it's nice to say, but you don't need to say, "Oh my gosh, I love your publication so much. I love your writing so much," if it's not
Right.
true, right? It just comes
Right.
off as try hard and disingenuous. So I think it's really important to focus on the specificity of like why you're reaching out to them, why your story and not someone else's,
Mhm.
uh, the things like that.
I love that. Yep, I
Mhm.
think that's absolutely true, yeah, and I mean, I think it's fine to engage with them, outside of trying to pitch them, like, just sometimes there are reporters that, I just banter with on Twitter about pets or kids or, anything like that. I think that's fine. What you don't wanna do is be stalkery and weird and, like I saw somebody, in the PR world recommending that you do kinda stalk the reporters and try to get their personal phone or personal email, and they really don't like that at all, so
No.
I would say that is a big old no-no. Um,
Yeah, and I also just think if your language is stalk the person a little bit, I think it shouldn't be your language.
yeah,
It's like follow them, engage with
yeah,
their content, read their content, get to know get to know their work. Right?
right, right.
Yeah. Oh, the other thing I want to add on you know, you said about media databases, sometimes they're slower to
Mhm,
being updated. That's really
mhm,
such a good point too, because I
mhm,
think when you're doing something like pitches, you
mhm.
need something that's more dynamic than something that's updated, once a year. Like you might
Yeah,
be looking for the real time conversations or recent coverage. You might not be looking for less dynamic things like circulation number of a publication, right? Like you might be
right,
looking at like what is the recent coverage, what are people talking about, what's in the zeitgeist, things like that. So Twitter can definitely help you do that because it's all real time. And then SparkToro can help a little bit, right? Like
mhm,
for SparkToro, a lot of our social insights are updated once every 120 days or so.
mhm,
So it's not real time, but
right,
it's dynamic. It changes every couple of months, and you can see things thematically over a given season or a given quarter.
mhm. Yeah, I've heard a lot of great buzz about it in the PR community, about SparkToro, because I think we're looking for tools that go beyond, the media
Mhm.
database, and I'm not trying to say, you don't need one or you can't use a media database, but I'm just saying in addition to that, I always do my own research anyway. Even before SparkToro, I would go and look at the website and try to see what the masthead, said, or just even just, like look up a reporter and see what their latest story was. Sometimes they haven't written a story in months. That means they might not be there anymore. So yeah, don't just I guess always just go a little bit further. Maybe that's always my advice with everything is like, don't, I don't know if you can really overthink these things. Um, so let's go on here and talk about some kind of practical, tactical ways PR and content teams can work together. We know that these two go together because I remember the first time I started to hear about content marketing and someone kind of explained to me, what that term meant way back when it was kind of a buzz term and nobody really knew exactly what it meant. And when they started telling me, I'm like, oh, yeah, well, that's what PR. That's what PR is. That's what we do. So they're not exactly alike. I understand that, but I will say there's some overlap. Of course, we both create content. PR. A lot of PR pros went to journalism school. I did. Writing is kind of my first love. A lot of us, really do a lot of writing. We build relationships, right? Journalists and analysts, and those are influencers. So that was around before there was a term for it, I think. And then reaching out to audiences to raise visibility. Of course, that's something PR is charged with. And of course, we both work on thought leadership initiatives. So how can you work together on projects? And I wanted to just include a few examples. There's really endless ways that you can work together, but of course, in a press release, you could include a link to to content. If you had a press release, you could turn that into a blog post, or you could turn it into maybe some, a short video. You could take a customer case study and you could pitch that, especially to trade publications. They really love that, especially if there's data and some numbers, some meat in there about how the customer has used your solution to save time or money. And then, of course, if you land speaking engagements for your executives, for example, if PR is able to secure those, then you can turn the topics that they speak on into a series of articles. And I'm
Yeah.
sure you can think of a lot of other examples.
Yeah, I love the case studies one. That's such a great one that is obviously aligned with one's business goals because it's a case study of your own business. But I
Yeah.
still kind of think it's a under leveraged opportunity, I think, in a
Yeah.
lot of places. And I think in some of the most successful examples that we might see online or in publications, they might be examples that you don't think of as case studies because because the story is told so well. Um, a,
Hmm.
an example that what really worked well for us when I worked at Fitbit on the B2B side was, we had this great case study with Dayton, Ohio's Regional Transit Authority. So
Hmm.
their union of bus drivers. They had a bunch of Fitbit devices. They had a great corporate wellness program, and it wasn't just the bus drivers, right? It was also the corporate employees, but they better engage with their physical health. They got more active, they lost weight, they improved their biomarkers, really, really great health outcomes. But we were able, and as a company, like as an employer, the regional transit authority was able to lower their healthcare costs by a couple $1 million per year. So that was one of our biggest case studies at Fitbit, and it was something we were able to get a lot of great press coverage out of because it was so focused on the outcomes to the individuals and to the company as a whole. So I think when you think about case studies and
Hmm.
how PR and content teams can collaborate, it's, really think about the stories you can tell and how your content, maybe how your content team can dig in and do some of that research and um, make put together a really strong story and have PR kind of be that guiding light for it.
Yeah. Yep. That's a great example. That's a great story. So let's see. So contributed articles, posts, blogs. I think this is something that is overlooked a lot. And I know in PR, we are, at least I am doing this more and more with clients because it does a few things. It accomplishes a few goals. It positions them as the expert. It increases their visibility, but it can also lead to additional opportunities. It can help build more momentum for them. If they are, featured in a publication, somebody else might see that, might ask them to speak, might ask them to contribute a quote to a roundup, might ask them to, write an article for their publication. And I think it really can help with momentum. So it's not something to overlook. And then this is something that I hear Andy Crestodina, who I just, I think everything he does is is great. And he talks about this all the time, squeezing all the juice you can out of each piece of content because you spend a lot of time creating content, and then you should absolutely be repurposing it. And I mean, most companies now have a newsletter. You can use content that was in your newsletter and use it on your site, or vice versa. Of course, there are just many, many ways you can go back and forth here and do so much more than just publishing a blog post and calling it a day. There's more you can do there. And then what if you can't get the media to cover your story? There are some ways you can, get it out there. You can self-publish it. You can publish it on your blog. You can publish it on Medium, publish it on LinkedIn. And of course, whatever you're doing, you should always be sharing it on social media, which brings me to this because I feel like a lot of us are working in silos, and it's really difficult to squeeze the most out of every piece of content if we're all in our little silos doing our own little thing with our heads down and nobody's talking to anybody else. Um, I have an example, recently of a client who was doing, a lot on social media, but had not done a lot in PR. So they, of course, brought me in to help, and that's great. But it's a learning curve there, because a lot of times something will be on social media, but they failed to let me know about it. So I'll see it and I'll be like, oh, if I had known about this, we probably could have done a little more with it. So it's just kind of like teaching them, and it's a learning curve. And I think it happens, in small and large organizations alike. I don't think there's, it just happens everywhere, that everybody I talk to cites this as an issue.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I think most social media teams or social media managers know all too well the last minute request of, "Oh, can you make this post really quick? Can you get it up in a few minutes?" Like, no, it's much better when everyone can coordinate, and then once you coordinate in advance, then like it also gives maybe your social media team the opportunity to create additional assets from the announcement or whatever it is that you're
Mhm,
promoting, right? Like
mhm.
it gives them the opportunity to think of other or tangential content, like
Yeah,
related stories that would support that overall one or that main piece.
right.
Um, and it just gives the opportunity for teams to collaborate in real time and get together a series of assets that work really hard for your business.
Yeah, absolutely. These are just a few, ways that you can kind of encourage the teams to collaborate. Of course, you can encourage them, and it's a process. It's not like, okay, we're going to say, today we're going to work together, and then tomorrow it happens. You have to kind of foster that environment and that collaborative nature, I guess, and not a competitive nature, but collaborative. And then, of course, you can, use shared tools and spreadsheets, create common goals. Of course, you can plan. That's always good. Plan integrated campaigns, and then you want to measure and evaluate and talk through, what did and didn't work and what needs to be tweaked for next time. And as I promised, a few tools before we wrap up here. These are some things that a lot of them are free or very low cost. Most of them have a free version, and then you can pay, for an upgraded version. So TalkWalker, I swear by the TalkWalker free alerts. Yes, I use Google Alerts, but TalkWalker catches alerts that Google does not. So I say use both. If you can. I use both for clients and for my business. Grammarly, I love it because it follows me. I type all day. I'm typing email, I'm typing on social media, typing all kinds of documents. It follows me around, and it helps me catch errors, because sometimes when you're really in a hurry typing on the fly, you might not catch something. And I do use the paid version of that. Word Hippo is one that Ann Handley mentioned at Content Marketing World a few years ago, and I've been using it ever since, because it goes a little bit beyond I can't say it, the thesaurus, to help you find synonyms for your words that you use all the time. And
I
I
haven't
really,
heard of Word Hippo. I'll have to check it out.
yeah,
Huh,
I do
yeah.
use it quite a bit, because just sometimes you're tired of saying solution 10 times, like you got to figure out a different way to say that. So um, and then MailChimp, I use that for my newsletter. I think it's free up to like 2,000 subscribers. I think, really almost everybody probably has a newsletter, or if they don't, they should be thinking about it, because newsletters are hot. Newsletters are back. And it gives you a place to keep, to publish all your content. Google Analytics, of course, SparkToro. We talked a little bit about that. Unsplash and Pixabay, great for images. Twitter, I talked about that. I can't say enough about it. I use it for all kinds of things. Journalists even put story opportunities up there. I got a client in the Washington Post because I just happened to see the reporter on Twitter and responded. And, like later that afternoon, they were on the phone. And yeah, so it just works so well. Buffer for social media scheduling. I use Pablo by Buffer for images. I know a lot of people love Canva. I find Pablo very easy. I use it for my blog and for my my Twitter chat to just create images on the fly, all free, easy, etc. And then
Is it like to create? Is it like to create like graphs or charts? I'm not familiar with Pablo.
It pulls images from Unsplash and Pixabay, and
Oh.
you can just pull an image. I use it sometimes for social media. If I need an image, even for clients, sometimes, like if I have a specific topic and they don't have any imagery of their own, I'll go in there and, pull a picture, and we can put text on it or not. And it's very easy. You can plug it right in. If you use Buffer, you can plug it in. If you don't use Buffer, you can still use their tool and just download the image and then, upload it to whatever you're working on, blog post, social media post, etc. So I like it. I don't use Canva. I know that I'm the odd man out on that one, but I just but Pablo's really, really, really easy for me to use. So I just stick with that. But I'm not a graphic designer, and I would never claim to be one. So and then Muck Rack, I included that one just in case they have a tool, it's free. You can go in and see, you can put your link in there and see who's sharing. So the realities, just as we wrap up here, of course, this is not an overnight type of effort, as many things are in life and in marketing. It takes time. It's something you have to kind of keep working at. You have to look at it like it's the long game. Even if you feel like nobody's paying attention, nobody's watching, or nobody's like collaborating, just keep going. And just, this is kind of my mantra, just keep showing up. Don't stop. Don't give up. And I just want to thank you so much.